Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. I'm Vivian Carrasco, and I'd like to welcome you to Turning Inward. I am your creative midwife, your teacher, and host of this podcast. Together, we're going to navigate the interior life by unearthing your personal truth, insight, and your inner knowing. In 2 words, this is your inner work. So today I have Christy Haussler with us, and she is a super special guest. You guys know that I always say super special and excited, but it's always true. It really is. Christy's actually the producer for the Turning Inward podcast, and we had a little tweaking happen right before we started recording. So I was excited about that little lesson. But the reason that we're talking with Christy today is because she was a lifesaver for me. And I can see your face right now, Christy, so I'm going to try not to tear up and get emotional. But if I do...
Hey. Oh, gosh, I do that kind of stuff too.
Yeah,
it's like company. Let's be blubbering together.
Yeah. So about, I guess almost a year ago, maybe 8 months ago, I threw in the towel. I said, Christy, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what has a stranglehold on my voice, and I'm just giving up. And you supported me through that. And that was amazing. Not everyone has those kind of folks on their team. And I'm just grateful for you. Aww. I wrote down a couple of the words that you said to me, and you might not know this because I haven't told you yet, but I would look at those words as inspiration. Wow. I would. And I had some faith deep down that it would come back. But when I needed to, I would read what you said. And here's a little bit about what you wrote to me. You said, step into it, my dear. It's not about you. It's about your message. We all have the same fears. And the most important 4 words, you can do this. Uh-huh. I wanted to thank you for that. And I actually wanted to have a conversation with you about our voices and our confidence and your experience with listening to other people's voices. So that's the intro to this.
It's funny. It's funny because I remember, getting your email saying I'm not really sure what's going on with me until I find that out for myself. I can't, how can I help anyone else? And so I do remember, it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I need to take a little more time with this. This is not your normal, oh, my show's going to be late, or something like that. But there's definitely something that happens whenever you feel like you've lost your voice, it's not a physical losing of your voice, but it's almost like the guideposts go somewhere and you can't see them anymore. So you're really not sure where to go, or what you're doing. And I think I do see it happen a lot with, especially women in podcasting sometimes. And that is the point at which sometimes podcasts go away, and they never come back. Everyone podcasts for different reasons, though. Some people probably are still podcasting long after they lost their voice. I should
a little industry insight there.
Because you feel like you get to a point where you feel like it's meaningless, or it's just sort of rote, or I need to keep putting out content because I have a sponsor, I need to get the sponsor money or whatever. Your podcast is very different because it is about those deeper connections and those conversations that sometimes you don't really have with other people, but you're having them every time you put out a show. You're having those conversations with people. And to me, I don't know, that might be just your normal life, where you go around having these deep conversations with people all the time and bring stuff out of them that they're like, wow, yeah, But most of us don't really slow down enough for that, And so I think it's kind of interesting that your podcast is very rooted in, I think, who you are, versus who the person that might be, the most marketable, or the person that everyone might be the most drawn to. Like, you're not trying to put on all that. You're just doing you every single day. And then a few of those times you're recording that. That's what it sounds like to me,
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? So during that time, were you finding that you lost your appetite for recording shows or even having those conversations? Or, what, if you look back now, what do you feel like was going on with when you would say, I'm not really sure what's going on with me. I feel like I've lost my voice.
That's a really good question. And looking back on that period of time, I'd sit down to do it. I'd write the framework up. I'd have a handful of topics, but to actually record, I would make up so much stuff. I remember sending questions out about more technology and more tools and just making excuses. The interesting thing that I found over that year is I didn't stop serving. Like I still served my community. I still had private clients, but there was something about this medium that I think in a deeper level, I think that this medium and our voice across the airwaves and the way that people listen and how intimate it is, it just scared me at some level. And I was judgmental about that because 4 years ago, I felt that stranglehold across my voice and I worked through it and I was like, why am I here again? What is going on? And so it's that judgment, I think, that really beat me down to say, just forget it. I'm throwing in the towel.
Yeah. I think that especially we as women podcasters who are putting things out, most women tend to be extremely authentic. And we feel like if we're not at the right place or the right frame of mind, then we can't adequately go on a podcast and talk to other people about it. It's like that's not an area in our lives where we have complete mastery. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even the show that you released yesterday, you were talking to Teresa Ott about it's not about arriving at the destination and then looking back and saying, oh, here's all these lessons I learned from it. But it's sort of about learning through that journey of getting to that destination. And it really is the same thing with a podcast. I mean, it is very much is an intimate thing that you're doing whenever you're sharing your voice with other people, and other people are listening to your voice in their ears as they're doing, some very important parts of their lives, whether they're at the gym or they're walking or they're cooking or they're, in the shower, wherever it is they're listening to you. And I think sometimes we hold ourselves to almost an unreachable standard of perfection, feeling like I can't talk about letting go of anger because I have anger I haven't let go of, or I can't talk about money management because I've got some skeletons in my closet there, or I can't talk about having a great relationship whenever here I am struggling with this relationship at home that's not going the best. But I think you're right. Those struggles are where the lessons come. And, that's what we're here for, is to learn those lessons through the struggles. And they always say, what do they say? Smooth seas don't make skillful sailors. You know what I mean? You never want to go out on a boat when the captain's never unhooked from the dock. So it's not going to turn out really well. It'll probably be on the news, So, but it's true. And I think, so I think a lot of what, you're talking about is that self-judgment that we kind of put on ourselves. And then at the same time, or the fear of, if I put this out there and someone sees that I don't have it all together, then they're going to go back and be able to throw stones at me, or they're going to be able to say she's a fraud. And I think for women podcasters, especially ones that are really authentically walking in their voice and in their path, that is like the most hurtful thing that someone could do, is say that they're being fake or they're doing something for the wrong reasons, because that authenticity almost gives you, it just almost puts you in a situation where, I don't want to say it, the things that you want to hide, it forces you to want to hide them rather than put them out there with people. But when you start being authentic, it's almost like that's when you have to keep, when it gets tough and you're grinding it out, you're starting a podcast saying, I'm just going to tell you guys, I don't really know if I'm qualified to do this, or I don't really know that I'm in the best frame of mind right now to do this, but here's some thoughts I had for you. And I don't really even know why I'm qualified to talk about this, because I'm not feeling it right now.
Right.
But that's also sometimes when your audience comes back and says, that helped me the most, that you weren't perfect and that you're struggling with the same things I'm struggling with, and that you did what you needed to do anyway, So it's an interesting process, but it does happen a lot of times, in the podcasting world. I mean, that's the place where women sometimes are most comfortable putting their voice out there and sharing their mission and their vision. And it's also the place where it shines the biggest light on us. And many times we're not comfortable with that.
Yeah, in that spotlight. Now, I have a
Yeah.
question for you. Based on your experience with across the industry, is there anyone that has that unshakable confidence? Is there anyone, or have you seen someone's voice just never waver, like the doubt never creep in?
I have a couple of, it's funny because I have a couple of clients that have just done a bang up job of really calling out to their tribe and having those people respond to them. You know what I
Mm,
mean? And they have their diehard fan base. And one of them in particular, when you listen to her show, she actually does 2 shows a week on her show. And one of them is a solo show where she's talking about being, whatever it is she's dealing with and how to be better and all this kind of stuff. And then another one is an interview show. So she does 2 every single week. However, when you also follow her on Facebook, what you see there is the struggles behind the scene. Not that she's personally like, saying, I'm not sure if I should be doing this, but she might post a picture and the picture might be from, high school or college or 10 years ago. And that she might say something to the effect of like, this child before this picture was taken probably stayed up all night with anxiety, probably did, but she would basically list off all the issues she had. I was so OCD about wanting to be perfect. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of speaking my mind. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that, in very much sharp contrast to where she is now, because she's forced herself to scare herself to death by expanding her comfort zone. Many
mm,
times when she goes to conferences, let me just say she's fabulous at conferences. She'll speak at conferences. She'll go to conferences. She is, and you meet her and she is just the most outgoing person ever. But getting ready for the conference, you'll see her posting, this is one of those things that 5 years ago, I never thought I could fly across the country and go to a conference alone. It makes me crazy to think about, what am I going to say to somebody? How are people going to like me if I'm, different in person than I am online? And, so she sort of verbalized all those fears. And that is actually part of what she uses to really call her tribe out, because they're about being fearless and shameless and, going forward anyway,
mm,
and everyone else be damned. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it comes without the insecurity or without the, even the people that seem to have the most confidence, it never, like, there's always something that could put them out of their comfort zone. And there's always
yeah,
something that could sort of rattle them. And you'll see that. So that's why I think it is so interesting to follow. I would consider myself friends with most of my clients. And, I very much know what their show is about and sort of who their target audiences are. And when I see them on social media being just absolutely vulnerable. I mean, and this particular client that I'm referring to, she might have a shirt on and it has like a big old smear of chocolate or something. And she's like a fitness person. And she's like, I guess this what happens whenever you, like fall asleep with your one bite of chocolate a day, or, you know what I mean? It's just that she's not afraid to put it out there and be like, look, I don't care. I did this. It's okay, that I'm sort of a hot mess right now or
yeah,
whatever. So, but it's embracing all of those parts, because, I think none of us like to feel like that we can't ever measure up to anyone, and their standard.
mm,
And so I think
mm,
even those people that we might consider ourselves part of their fan club because of the work they're doing and the work they're putting out, we also can't hold them to a higher standard than we would hold ourselves to, and realize that they're still having bad days. They're getting up in the morning and saying, I've kind of got these people now looking to me for guidance and I don't know what to tell them, or I really blew this. I did something really stupid,
mm.
and what lessons. And that's the thing, this one particular client always shares what those lessons are. I may have done this, but next time I'll know this is something I need to embrace or walk into. So there are several examples of that. So to their fans, you would never see, you might see some insecurity. They might talk about it as a podcast topic, But whenever you follow them on social media, that's whenever you feel like you're seeing the real behind the scenes of their lives. And it's not all rosy. And they have kids that are walking into kindergarten, pitching a tantrum, and embarrassing them in the grocery store, just like every other mother is. But that's what those mothers need to see. They don't need to feel like they're trying to follow some level of perfection that's unattainable, because no one has that. When you're dealing with kids, you never know what you're getting, what you're going to be dealing with. Could be a meltdown. It might be a good time. It might be, y'all pray for me, cross my fingers, we're going in. Let's see how this doctor's appointment goes. And then, later on, you're like, okay, well, number one, I'm never going to do that again. Number two, I'm sure he'll be fine till he's 18 or, whatever. So it's just,
it won't cause too much damage.
Exactly. How much damage could I do now, So it's just very interesting, because I think we all have that. No matter what level of achievement we get to, we all have those insecurities and those internal doubts pop up, and those voices in our head don't change just because everyone else is saying, oh, you're awesome. You're still repeating, those tapes in your head that you're nothing. No one's ever going to pay attention to you, or, in any of those negative messages that we constantly tell ourselves. They don't just go away magically because you have a podcast that makes it into iTunes and noteworthy, or, that you're suddenly, getting speaking gigs at big women's conference on empowerment. It doesn't mean you've mastered empowerment.
Right. Well, one of the things that I've recognized is that even though there are certain parts of me that have deepened, that consistent mastery doesn't exist. That we are humans, right? And our states of being, our emotions, they just come and go. And sometimes we don't sit back and, like you said earlier, slow down enough to let that wave come in or that storm go by. And, our emotions are like the weather, the clouds will pass and then you'll come through.
And, in our constant state of being, our natural human nature is, when things are great, what do? We quit paying attention to the little things. You know what I mean? We're very aware whenever we're struggling of, I need to do this, and I need to have my gratitude journal out. And I need to do all these things. But when things are going really well, we're kind of like, hey, I got this. This was a great week. I had an awesome week. I had a great time with my family. I did whatever on the weekend. And, you just feel like things are going along. But there truly are very few lessons learned, and if you look back over the course of your life, you might remember the very highs and you might remember the very lows. But there's a lot more you remember in association with those lows, because you had to learn and you had to grow. And I can even think about, if I look back at me as a person over my lifetime, I'm not at all the same person I was 20, well, I'm going to end up being completely lying here. Okay, 30 something years ago when I got out of high school. Don't pretend like I'm 40 anymore. So anyway, that person served me during that time. And then even from that high school to through college and getting out after college and establishing yourself in the world, she was one other person that sort of was a different incarnation of the previous person, a little bolder, a little more self-assured. But if you had told me when I was 30 years old that by the time I'm 50, I'm going to be where I am right now, and I'm going to be having all of these clients that I'm, talk to all the time on these Skype calls and all these other things, or that people on the internet that I don't know are going to reach out to me and we'll want to have a call together. And what would I say to a complete stranger that I don't even know and I've never met? I would have thought you were talking about something from a science fiction movie. I would never have understood. And the funny thing about it is, I would have never even imagined myself in a place where there was a subject matter or a content topic that I would have enough mastery to lead others in, And I think, we all choose our niches very, based on our passions and that sort of thing. But I think I wouldn't have been prepared for that, or I wouldn't have, if you had told me that was what I was going to be doing, I would have been like, there's no way. I just don't see the path from there to here. But every time you do it, and even, 5 or 6 years ago before I started my business, and I was just some sort of lurker online in the Facebook forums or whatever, Like I would have never dared step up and say, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that, or this is better than this. And let me tell you why. And let me educate you, because I didn't have that confidence. And if someone said, when I used to do my podcast, I did this 5-day a week interview show about small business, local businesses all over the country. And I was working my full-time job while I was doing this. And I would have to send out like 10 cold emails a day just to keep my pipeline full. And it was before podcasting was popular. It was like 2012, before it was popular, before it was even local businesses, before it was on their radar. And people would email me back or, respond to my emails, and they would say, can you call me? And I'm like, I'm not calling you. It's like, no, I'm not going to call you. What if it's a bad time? What if you're rude to me? What if you're like, oh, no, I'm not interested in that? I'm not going to call you. But the funny thing is, like, I was asking them to come on my show. I was asking them to come and share their business. So in that context, I was like, that was as far as my comfort zone went. Now, someone says, oh, can somebody, jump on a call and do this with me or show me how to do this? I'm like, sure, here's my Skype ID or whatever. And it's just funny how we begin to embrace that comfort zone in a very different way. But you don't get there by continuing to stay comfortable, and right. So that uncomfortability of you saying, a few years ago, something had a stranglehold on my voice, and then all of a sudden I was back here again. Like, that's not one-time mastery. You know what I mean? Because it could be a stranglehold on your voice for this circumstance, or for, cause triggered by this or that in this scenario. And then now today you're dealing with it in a completely different scenario. But all of that friction and that, uncomfortability of, feeling like I don't know what I'm doing right now, I don't have my voice right now, is the catalyst for growth, and it is the catalyst for us pushing through. So the next time it happens, it probably won't be related to the same thing. You know what I mean? It might be in a completely different circumstance that you haven't experienced yet, and you haven't sort of moved it into your comfort zone yet.
So it sounds like, and I think in metaphor sometimes, and when you were talking, a metaphor came up, like the friction that comes up is the fertilizer for the soil. And we know what fertilizer is made out of.
Yeah, exactly. It's some hard stuff. I look at it as, after Hurricane Irma, we're still doing a lot of construction and that sort of thing in our house. And one of the things that I've had to do a lot of is preparing wood to be used for railings or, trim work or all these other things. And that sanding process, when you start with a really coarse sand, and every time you're sanding, you're then running your fingers over it and seeing what, how does it feel now? As you keep narrowing that, you get a finer grit sandpaper, and pretty soon you just get to a point where it feels like butter. It feels so smooth. I mean, honestly, as weird as it sounds, if I had a job where all I was doing is sanding things all day long, I would be in the poorhouse, clearly. But it would be so gratifying to take some wood that has, things that you're going to get splinters on, or it has knots in it, or imperfections, or little bumps, or maybe it's even been, pricked or poked with nails or staples or whatever, and basically be able to go back and smooth all that out. Something about that is just so, it relaxes my mind, and it is so gratifying. But it is that friction is what gets rid. I mean, it doesn't make sense for us to say, oh, we need to get rid of surface bumps. Great. Use something with surface bumps on it to get rid of surface bumps. But that's what you're doing with that friction. And it definitely smooths things out, and it begins to change the shape of the wood. If you're trying to put an angle on it, if you're trying to put a curve, or you're trying to, make things more ergonomic, or it just depends on what you're trying to do with it. But it's all about the amount of time you dedicate to that sanding process. And even with your, when you're finally painting things, it's, how many times you're going to do a coat and then sand it down. A lot of people do a coat and they don't sand it. They just let it dry and do another coat. And then they have brush strokes and all this kind of stuff. But doing that sanding just removes all those surface imperfections, and you can sand too deep, and you can dig, and you can gouge, and you can leave a burn mark in it. But if the tool is used properly and the sandpaper is used for what it's supposed to be used for, you end up with just a beautiful result that then can be enhanced by, you know, surfaces or putting varnish or shellac or even just oil or something else that you're, you know, doing for the finish that you want. And so I see that, and I always think about that, the things in my life that have been that sandpaper. And, you know, it's not a pleasant process, not like getting a massage. You know what I mean? So sandpaper can be rough, and it's so necessary to get us where we want to go, and it begins to reshape us in our whatever our new form is going to be.
I love that. The reshaping, and you said becoming a new person. And even when you were talking about your client where she scares herself to death, that letting go of the old us, right? Or the old story or who we were then, and allowing us, you know, narrowing that gap between that person and what we're moving into sounds like what you're describing.
It is. And it's knowing full well that everything that scares you can be sort of brought into your comfort zone if you do it enough and if you put yourself in those situations enough. I've had to do that a lot of times. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert naturally. And, you know, I could go on a trip somewhere and I could go through the airport. And if I'm, you know, if I'm buying a magazine at a shop or whatever, I can make small talk and make that clerk feel, you know, fantastic and be so kind to them. But I'm not going to be the person that's going to sit down on the airplane and start up a conversation with the person next to me. You know, I'm going to just let me enjoy my solitude, and, you know, and even going to conferences and things like that. It's hard for me to put myself out there in that way. Granted, the more I do them, the less anxiety and dread I have. I don't know if that's something I'll ever absolutely look forward to. I mean, that would be really nice at some point, you know. But those are the types of things that when we know we have a way, and I'll give you an example. I had this thing about, like, I don't like myself in pictures or on video or anything like that. And a lot of it is like, oh, I'm too fat, or, oh, now my hair is too gray, or, oh, I don't look like a Barbie doll or whatever I think you're supposed to look like on social media. And so I don't like myself on video. And so last December, I forced myself to do a 30-day Facebook Live challenge during the month of December. Now, I sort of strategically chose December because I thought, well, everyone's going to be so busy with their holiday stuff, they're not going to have time to really watch or, you know, do anything. But it was my way of sort of desensitizing myself. And what I had found previous to that is, it would be, I can't do a video today because I haven't put on makeup, or I haven't done my hair, or, oh, I've got to step out into the yard and pick up some palm fronds that are out, and I'm going to get all sweaty, and then by the time I come back, or my house is a mess, or I've got boxes piled up behind me, or I don't have, you know, it was always excuses as to why I couldn't do a video today. And by doing that 30-day Facebook Live challenge, I forced myself that, you know, if I had put on a visor that morning, you know, you end up with hat hair the rest of the day. So it's like, you know what? If I'm outside sweating, I'm just going to take the Facebook Live out with, you're going to see me in my natural environment. And I got to the point where it didn't matter so much about the makeup. It didn't matter so much about what I was wearing or whatever, but it took that concentrated 30 days of pushing my face in it to say, you have to do this today. It's 10 o'clock at night. You haven't done it yet. What are you doing? Oh, you're traveling to the in-laws for Christmas. You got to go do it, you know? And once I did that, like, now I'll get on video anytime, anywhere, looking like the ain't that I am. It's just, you have to force yourself to get out, you know, to the point where you're out of your own self-consciousness. And if anyone's under the delusion that I am, you know, 6 feet tall and 110 pounds and a model, then they've looked up the wrong Christy Haussler, right? Because that's not me. So, you know, I'm probably not shattering their impression of me whenever all of a sudden they see the real me on video or whatever. So it's sort of a matter of, you know, just getting over yourself. And so I tend to kind of do that with myself too, is I'll put myself in those situations where I can get rapidly desensitized so that it's not a bother anymore. It's not anything I can let be an excuse, because we hold those excuses. Man, we can make them, can't we?
Yeah, you have to get on the bike to learn how to ride it.
You
So,
do. And you have to
yeah,
be ready to fall, or look
exactly.
like a fool as you're going down or whatever. So
Yeah, take the
not
training
always
wheels
pretty.
off or the pedals.
Yeah.
It's your choice.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's one of the things that I absolutely love about within university. We journey together on 4 experiences a year, once a quarter. And right now, what we're doing is actually on our voice, and we're doing it through Voxer, where they share their voice to the group, to the community, and they do exactly what you said. They record and speak and then can listen to themselves and to others. And that, for you that, listening to us, I did the same thing in July of last year. I think I did a 30-day, not live, I think it was live, but a video experience because it was so difficult. And the only way to get past that difficultness is to move through it like
Yeah.
you did.
Face
Maybe,
it.
yeah, for my folks in the group, it's not public to the public, but
Right.
it still takes courage because it's beyond that comfort zone. It's at the edge of where they feel comfortable. But here's the thing about that. None of us do that alone, do we, Christy?
We don't. And let me also say this, that the behavior patterns of us avoiding that are very similar. Like the same excuses I gave myself are the same excuses that my clients give me now whenever I recommend they do
Mm.
that. The same excuses you had for not sharing your voice are the same things that you see again and again. So it is like you can kind of pat someone on the back and say, oh, honey, there is life after this. You will, you know what I mean? Because
You'll be
you've
all
been
right.
there and you've done it, and there's nothing new under the sun that's experiencing about this. It's all
Mm.
very, the excuses are the same. I hate the way my voice sounds. I hate the way I look. I'm too old. I'm too fat. I'm too inarticulate. I stutter, whatever it is. Those
Yeah. And
excuses
I
are the
think that's what I
same.
sensed underlying your words. We didn't have a conversation about it, but what I sensed underneath when I would read that message from you is this isn't new, right? Like you are
Exactly.
going to be able to do this. That's what I sensed in you. And we all need someone that can say that to us when we can't say it to ourselves because I was saying, no, I already did this before. Why am I here again?
Mm-hmm. And probably being harder on yourself because you thought you had already put that behind you. You thought you had already conquered it. And now, granted, if I had said it in a different way, and been like, oh, Vivian, everyone goes through this. Everyone goes through this about, a year into their podcast. It's going to happen. It's not a big deal. Just go ahead and keep recording. I might not have address the real issue. You know what I mean? It's like I might have been speaking to it on a much more surface level. And I could tell whenever you, of all people who are very, very in tune with people speaking their voice and being authentic and being themselves, when you step up and say, I can't find my voice and I'm not really sure what's going on with me, like that was something that made me just stop and say, okay, this is a little different this time. This is not somebody just saying, oh, I don't have time to keep doing this podcast thing. This is
Mm.
someone saying, I'm sort of paralyzed and crippled by this. And so
Yeah.
in my mind, the way to support you in that is to basically speak to the lack of confidence that you were having in your voice and to speak to the words that I knew were true, but the words that you might not believe at that
Right.
point. And so that
Right.
was the only way I could deal with that.
And thank you again for doing that.
Oh,
You
you're very welcome. It's funny that, sometimes I think we don't realize that we can speak to someone can impact them. I mean, to me, that was an email that came in that needed to be addressed. And at the same time, once I sent it, I knew I sort of had to let you sit with it. And,
Mhm.
at whatever point in time, I didn't say, let's get on a call and talk about this. And I'm going to pump you up and be your cheerleader because it wasn't about that. It was about more of an internal struggle. And I think with you, I felt like whenever you were ready, you would come back and say, I can do this or that, not knowing that you were continuing to return to those words whenever you needed that. I mean, I think it goes to show that we might need to spend a little more time thinking through our words, before we just rush through and put out another email.
Well, it's that whole idea of slowing down again, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So
And really, I mean, the same way you would give someone time if you were sitting with them and they started crying or they were,
mm,
having an emotional issue, You wouldn't just keep doing, all right, come on, buck up now. Come on, you're going to be fine. You give them that space and you take that time to sort of sit with them through it.
Mhm.
And then whenever they're ready, then you can both move forward together in whatever area they're comfortable with. It is a lot about slowing down. And it's really funny because I wouldn't have believed a few years ago that you could do this kind of thing online or even via email or whatever and get that kind of, feel that kind of emotional connection with someone. But it does happen, and it's not fake and it's not inauthentic. But I guess I would say to people is, get the support wherever you can. If you don't have it in your physical life around you, there are plenty of places online where you can get that support and get those other people around you who aren't going to judge you, but they're going to say, I recognize this. And the reason I recognize this is because I dealt with the same thing 4 months ago,
Right.
or I see this again and again, and it's okay. And I think the more we can slow down and really hear each other. And, I think you're of the space too, where, even from a social media perspective or whatever, we feel like we're all in each other's faces all the time and listen to this and buy this and take my course and do this and do that. And I think a lot of what you're doing is very counterintuitive because you're basically saying, stop all the noise, stop,
Yeah.
hold up,
Yeah.
sit with you and sit with other like-minded people for a little while and let's figure this stuff out. And I think that's very needed right now.
Well, thank you. Well, and I also advocate for you doing that on your own terms, what's easiest for you at your edge. So if it's easiest for you to pick up a book from someone that's saying that to you, or it's easiest for you to listen to a podcast for someone to
Mm-hmm.
say that to you in your ear, you might not be ready for that new community. You might not be ready for that new experience, but find that support because we're humans. We don't do anything alone. There is that friction, whether it's
Yeah.
sandpaper or another hand or another heart or another set of eyes, ears, or, someone saying something to you.
And truly, when we think we're alone with it, we're not, because what's happening is all, whatever the negative patterns are that have been programmed in our head, like that's what we're sitting with. So
Mhm.
we might as well do what we can do to counteract that,
Yeah.
by saying, at least let me listen to a supportive podcast or let me listen to, a program or read a book or article or something that is going to at least provide the counterbalance to what is going on in your head the rest of the time. And
Right.
I think,
Neutralize.
when you realize you got to give yourself more than what you already have in your head that's saying negative things to you, then you begin to get a little bit more purposeful about reaching out and finding those support mechanisms, whatever they
Yeah.
may be.
And like you said about looking back at your 20s and your 30s, you couldn't have imagined where you are now, but you're
No.
there.
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
can't so wherever we're sitting, we can't imagine what
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna evolve or grow into, but we're stepping there every step of the way. And when I wrote those words to you, throwing in the towel, I couldn't have imagined coming back.
Yeah.
But looking back, sitting here now, I do feel like my voice is stronger, like I am bolder, like I
Mm-hmm.
can speak from an even more genuine, intuitive place
Mm-hmm.
because I let myself give up and come back.
Yeah.
If I had
And you also can have new empathy for others that are going through that because you
mm,
know exactly all too
yeah,
well. It's like he never lets us forget, because it keeps putting us back through these things again and again because he could be to get a little hard hearted about that,
yeah.
if we didn't continue to experience it.
And I love that you said that because that's actually there's an icon in my branding and it's this spiral, and it reminds me that we circle back just deeper and deeper and deeper, you know?
Yeah.
We
And it's true. It is, there's cycles that we go through and sometimes we feel like we display mastery in a lot of areas that, for a really long period of time. And then all of a sudden, how could we be showing up with a deficit in that area again or
right.
dealing with the doubt in that? And it just, here you are back at the spiral. Just get on
Mhm.
and ride it all the way through. So the good news is that we're all doing the same thing. And even the
We
people
are,
that you
even
kind
if we can't see it.
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Even if we
yeah.
can't see it behind the scenes, every single person moves through the same cycles.
Yeah, they do. And it's funny because occasionally people, especially when I say the people out there, I'm talking about like, the people that we would look up to on social media or whoever and would say, they've got it all or that's the kind of business I want to have and whatever. Occasionally they'll peel back the curtain and say, 2 years ago I went through a really big depression or I went through this or I went through that. And none of that was visible at the time because we're so good at keeping those facades up and we're so good at hiding behind that nice glossy, image of what our life is supposed to be in social media world or podcast world. But really what draws people to us is when we can say, I had a fear of being on video too. I don't feel like I
Mhm.
look good enough. I don't feel like I'm thin enough. I'm not happy with,
Mhm.
this about myself, but I knew enough not to let that stop me, and I
Yeah.
feel like whenever we go ahead and push through, what it does is it draws our vulnerability draws people to us more than our seemingly mastery of whatever the topic is because people need to know that they're not in it by themselves and they need to know
Yeah.
that we're kind of all struggling together. And I think that's so much of what you do is you bring out those lessons that can be learned from those struggles. And there's no shame in it. There's no condemnation. There's no judgment about it. It's just, you know what? You're there now and I was there 2 years ago. And 2 years from now, I might be there and you're not, you know,
Mhm.
we're
Yeah.
all on a continuum. It's just a cycle.
Yeah. So finding support, scaring yourself to death, putting
Mm-hmm.
yourself in front of whatever's scaring you are two of the things that you've mentioned as insights for finding your voice again or moving through whatever fear you have.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you would share on how to do that or how you've seen other people do that?
The people that I've seen most successful at doing it have a little bit of, I don't want to say it's a boldness, but there are people that truly, they've mastered the art of not expecting perfection from themselves. And
Mm,
so when they don't give perfection, it's still okay that they're putting it out there. And I think sometimes, especially women, we feel so much pressure to, be perfect to our husbands and our children and our families and our followers and our colleagues and our employees and all these people. And, you know, if you have a blowout or a meltdown or whatever, the judgment that you put on yourself is so much harder than what everyone else, would give you. But the people that I see that successfully do it will put it out there and be like, I had a complete panic attack meltdown today. And let me tell you what happened. And they'll put it out there not because they're proud of it. I mean, they're certainly
mm,
not, but it would be put out there in the same way as if I did something great today. It's just what occurred. It's just what life
mm,
is. And I
mhm,
think there's a lack of effort on their part to try to sanitize it from their audience. And it's like, if you like me and if you want to be sort of in my tribe, you're going to understand you're dealing with an imperfect person. And so they're not always going to have the right answers. They're going to make mistakes. But the whole point is, let's have a discussion around it. And I
mm,
think right now we're so, just in our society in general, we're so polarized and we're so
mm,
ascribing labels to people that if you're this, then I can't talk to you, or if you're this, unfriend me because I can't be your friend anymore. And what is lost is that dialogue around what happens whenever things don't go right or what happens whenever I do handle something incorrectly. And I can learn when somebody says, Christy, when you said this to me, I took it as this way. And in my mind, that was never even on my radar. Oh my gosh, now I have
mhm,
an awareness. And so what I see for people that are, really doing well, even with podcasting, whatever, is basically opening up your entire life and the vulnerability of, you know, yes, last night's dishes are still sitting on the sink over there. So here's my video anyway, because I didn't have time. I had a sick child. I was up all night, whatever it was. And they're just embracing it and saying it's okay not to be perfect. Because I think we get we've just got such a standard that we're trying to uphold that it sets us all up for failure because nobody can attain it, you know?
Right.
And that's not fun. It's not fun to face every day thinking you're never going to measure up. So you
Yeah.
basically change the bar and say, good news, I'm not supposed to measure up every day. I'm not
Yeah.
supposed to be perfect. And you know what? If I have a meltdown or something triggers me today, I can probably point to a time where it would have been much worse. So that is
Right.
progress, and that is
It
improvement.
gradually gets better, that
It is.
gradual.
It's not a switch that you turn off and go, okay, I dealt with things crappy yesterday, but now flipping the switch today, everything's going to be great, because just when that happens, you're going to be tested in a way that you've never seen before, and then it's going to go off the rails. But know that our lives are all sort of this beautiful, chaotic mess of happy tears and sad tears and frustration and elation. And we just vacillate between those. And when we only share the good stuff, it's like the, sort of the joke that we make about, people in the online whenever everything is, with women that look like models and cars that are, cost more than most people's homes and all this stuff. Like, that's not really life. I read something the other day, and it was, someone had posted it on Facebook, and it was sort of like a scribbled handwritten note. And it was from like a nurse in a hospital. And she had looked up and she said, 10,722 Twitter followers, 4,922 Facebook friends, and it just listed all of these social media entities, what all that person had. And she said, basically, 2 people were here at the hospital when they died.
Oh my God.
And it was making the point that we're putting so much emphasis on what is out there in the, online world, but we're neglecting those people that truly will be there with us whenever we're struggling in the hospital or we're on our deathbed or whatever. Like, those are the relationships. And I think, sort of with what you're doing, you're trying to expand the ability to be with people that are important in our lives by being genuine in who we are and figuring it out. And then the more we figure it out about ourselves, the more we're able to sort of cultivate that group around us that is like-minded. And then we get even more support and we figure out more things. And you can just continue to sort of get deeper and richer with those relationships that you have. But it's very telling, that whenever many of these personalities or personas that are out there are struggling, very few people know about it. And very few people talk about it until, 2 years later, whenever they've had their comeback, and then they can say, oh, that was a tough time for me. But I think if we allow ourselves to just be real, and, it's okay for you to start a podcast and say, I'm going to have to apologize because I'm not really sure that right now I'm in the right frame of mind. And let me kind of give you a little background, and we'll figure this out as we go, and maybe I'll have some revelations as we go along too. It's okay to do that. It's okay to put that out there because you know what it means? It means you're human.
Yes. And you can love being human no matter how hard it is.
Absolutely. And that is part of your culture, is just that, embrace all that stuff, because no one's ever going to have the fairy tale without any of the nightmares,
Right. Every tree, as the tree grows, it casts a larger shadow. But for the folks that are listening, for you that's listening, I want you to rewind the last minute. Listen to what Christy just said. She gave you gold. She literally just gave you gold. I'm going to rewind that and listen to it too, because she gave you a step by step. And here's what I'm realizing in this moment, listening to you and remembering what I went through and where I am now. What I recognize is my community, both within university and those I send emails to, because that's a more intimate relationship, I would share, these kinds of things. You haven't heard from me because, right? But I wasn't public. My public persona was all about the highlights, right? It was the highlight reel.
Yeah.
And what I'm recognizing, that was the edge that I was moving past. It was bringing down some of the doors or the walls and opening myself up even more, because when I think public, I think everyone, right?
Yeah. Anyone. Yeah.
Community. It was easy to share with the people I know that support me. but
Mm-hmm.
to be public about it is different. So I'm going to take that as the lesson that I learned from this round,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I'm going to come right back again,
Yeah.
right? And there's something that's going to happen that's going to push me farther out into that edge, is just be ourselves even more.
Yeah. That's my words to myself as well, because I can be very closed off and I'm a very private person, and,
Mhm.
putting stuff out there. And it's not even that I have the gall to believe that somebody cares about what's going on with me, but it's knowing that there are other people that are struggling along with me that might need to hear from me,
Yeah.
but it's also affecting me, and that if I can get through it, and if I can inspire them or even just support them in any way, then I should put it out there. And, you know, it's hard. It's hard for all of us, because I think we want to filter and we want to sanitize, you know,
Yeah.
because nobody likes for their meltdowns or whatever to be caught on on public
Right.
display. But it's not about that. It's not about, anything to do with feeling like that's okay, but it's just about saying that we're all doing this and we're all struggling. And if there's someone else that can be helped by hearing my story or what I'm going through, then I would be remiss not to share
Yes. I don't have any other words other than yes.
it.
Yes.
My sermon to me, my sermon to you, and everyone else. We've all got
And my
to do it.
reminder, yeah. You've really given me some insight, because the other thing that I hear in what you're saying, and what I realized and what I just went through, is I couldn't see it in the middle of it.
Right, right.
You can't see it in the middle of it. You can look back on it.
Mm-hmm. And that's when I was talking about the importance of kind of giving you space to sit with it and marinate. That has to happen, because I can't, like, if I had pushed you and said, come on, give me a show this week. You can do it. Come on, or whatever. It's not going to come off well. It's not going to be right, and I think knowing that you're a thoughtful and intuitive enough person, that you're working through it and you're struggling with it, all I had to do was give you a few more words to just keep in the mix, and keep
Mhm.
thinking about. And I think with what we do to each other, we have to give people that space to not be ready for a solution. And those of us solution oriented, we always want to apply the solution immediately. As soon as you hear about the problem, you want to apply the solution. But sometimes people have to struggle with it for a little while before they're open to it or ready to hear that solution, or even, to realize that they need the solution that you're,
Yeah.
offering. And so by
Yeah.
forcing that, you only create more friction. And then what it ends up is you push those people away, so that they're not going to bring that issue back to you anymore, because they didn't like the way you dealt with it.
Yeah.
So
And if
that push pull is not a great thing for long term
and
relationships.
if we go back to the sanding of the wood, if you're
Yeah.
pushing too far, what does it do to the wood?
Then it leaves something else you've got to fix, right? Now you've marred it in a completely different way, because you've burned it, or you've scarred it, or you've scuffed it and dug out way too much. So now you got to go back in and fill in, or somehow cover up that new imperfection. So it's like you've just done the exact same thing that you were trying to avoid doing. You've created
Mhm.
another imperfection, or another, scar, essentially.
So slow down. Let
Yeah.
yourself move through it at your own pace. Find the
Yeah.
support that you need. If you don't have it immediately around you, find a way to bring in that support. However,
Yeah. And to go back to the sanding thing, it's always very interesting. The sandpaper, the more coarse it is, the harder the more it's gonna remove. And so a lot of times, whenever you're doing something with wood, you don't really know what the right sandpaper is. So what you do is you start with the finest grit that's not going to make the most, scarring thing. So it's almost like that course of least resistance. Like, if I could
yeah,
give words to you and you can chew on them, I'm going to try that. But if you came back to me and said, Christy, do you have time to chat? I'm really frustrated, or something. Well, then a chat, that would be a coarser grit sandpaper, right? I
right.
mean, so it's like you've got all the tools there in your array of different sandpapers. Doesn't mean you have to go to 60 grit every time and just gouge them to death. You can use a 1500 grit sandpaper and just lightly, it can still make a difference. So
I love that you said that. So I'm super excited now, because that's one of the things that I intuitively have done and within university, and the more often I do it, the more I see that gradualness. Like even with this journey on voice and giving yourself permission to speak, at the participation level is up to the student. It's up to the person.
Yeah,
And they can just listen. Their intention can be just to listen, just to plant the seeds, no action at all, because it has to be something that feels just on the edge of not hard, but not easy. So
right.
finding that resistance that is just not scary enough, but easy enough for you to do.
Right. Yeah. And then as you do the one, then you begin to, the next one doesn't look near as scary because it's a much
Yeah,
smaller leap, much
yeah,
smaller leap from the 1500 grit sandpaper to the 1000 grit sandpaper, right? So you just go up the
right,
scale. So you're increasing their scale as they go. And before long, they're going to be in full participation mode given enough time, right? I
right.
mean, you see it happen
If that's
again and
right for
again.
them.
Yeah.
Well, and the mistake that we do, and the mistake that you mentioned also is we try to leap completely across without building that bridge for ourselves.
Yeah.
That's just this culture of push hard,
Instant
hustle.
gratification, do it now.
Exactly. But slowing it down, stepping back, and figuring out what that not easy step, but just enough to
Mhm.
give you that resistance. Starting with the smallest, what did you say it was? The smallest
Well,
grit?
yeah, the finest grit. So
The
2000
finest
grit
grit.
sandpaper and up is just very, very fine. In fact, those are the sandpapers that you use whenever you're actually trying to polish something. So it's
Aw,
crazy enough to think that actual abrasion is going to be what leaves the surface polish, because it's now removed all the scratches and imperfections to leave a nice glossy finish.
beautiful. I can see why puts you like in a relaxed
It
state.
does. It does because you're always moving toward, and every time you inch up with your, grits and that, experiment with something else, you're seeing how it affects the wood, or you're seeing sometimes it's the boat or something else that we're, sanding on. It might be fiberglass or whatever, but it just, you begin to see the difference that you're making, and you're like, that's what I'm working towards. And then you continue to do it. And it's very tactile, but it's also very, I don't want to say mind numbing in a bad way, but it's just like a repetitive motion and the hum of the sander, or if you're not using a sander, just the cadence of that, it just puts you
Mhm.
in sort of almost like a relaxing trance like state where you can just really focus on what
Your
your mind wants
thoughts
to
into
focus
it.
on. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like watching a fire burn or something, how it just sort of
yeah,
relaxes and eases your mind. So
yeah.
great.
So another insight I heard in your practical example is, do the work and then step back and look at it.
Yeah. And touch it and feel it and see what your impact is. And, I think, from lessons from, online business people, especially, people are always, oh, do your next course, do your next thing, do your whatever. You know what? Sometimes you need that for you or a lot of other people. It's that feedback from your audience before you plan your next move and before you make
Mhm.
that next decision, because you need to get that feedback coming in before to even know what your next step is going to be. And that's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay not to know where you're going to go and say, I'm on board for the next thing, but I need to know what everyone else needs, to provide
right,
that.
right.
Permission to not know is okay.
I like that. That's definitely a takeaway and a Twitterable.
Yeah.
Permission to, if I just said that word right.
Yeah.
Christy, I appreciate your time. Where can we find you? Tell everyone what kind of genius you are and how you serve the world.
Yeah, well, I do a couple of different things. My main website is teampodcast.com, and it's just my full service podcast production company. Recently, I've started a new media company for my local area. I live in the Florida Keys, which was hit hard by Hurricane Irma. We're in the area where the eye went across. And so we started a company called 43 Keys Media, where Florida Keys is 43 keys or islands connected by 42 bridges. And so what we're doing is we're creating a podcast and a content creation network for video and audio, where people here can sort of pull themselves up by the bootstraps in the community, so to speak, by creating content on our network that we can then go out and get sponsors for and have it be just really authentic content, all post-Irma content, that's covering really what it's like down here. So we're excited to be back in content creation mode. And it's a way that as a work at home business person, that it makes me get out of the house. It makes me go meet people and gets me out of my comfort zone, because I have to start introducing myself to new people and saying, this is what I do. Or do you have any synergies here? And so that's kind of exciting too. And so nothing will change with our podcast production, but it's just we're using our podcast production company to do all the production on this new content network that we're creating here for the Florida Keys. So that's 43keys.com there.
Beautiful. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. You always have such deep and insightful people on your show. And so I'm kind of, just sort of flattered that you would consider me coming on and sharing deep information whenever most people just want to know how to make your audio sound good or something.
You have deep insights for us. And I encourage you to rewind what Christy said, because she's got that learning straight from the source, straight from all of us who struggle and with these kinds of things. So I appreciate your insight and sharing your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a very fun conversation.
Yay. If something needs to change and you don't quite know what it is yet, tune in and turn inward. I host an online learning community where we can figure it out together. Feels like a little family, and it's a place where you can be supported and offer support, because togetherness sparks change. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more.